Hello and welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. We're joined today by author Peter Gibbons. Peter is a financial advisor and author of the highly acclaimed Viking Blood and Blade trilogy. He originates from Liverpool and now lives with his family in County Kildare. And he's here today because his new book, Death of a Kingdom, covers a period in history which is fascinating, violent, and has some very strong characters in it, which is basically the first couple of decades of the 11th century, when we have Ethelred the Unready, Sweyn Forkbeard, and his ally Thorkel the Tall, and then Edric Striona, who should be Ethelred's ally, but is only allied with himself, basically. So welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Sharon, and thanks, Derek. Thanks for having me, guys.
It's always a pleasure, Peter. So my first question has to be, was Ethelred II as inept as the history books would have us believe?
The short answer probably is yes. But that's a bit unfair. Like he was kind of born at a difficult time. Like he was the son of a king called Edgar the Peaceful, which kind of tells you something about those times, in that his father had ruled in a period where England hadn't suffered any kind of Viking raids or attacks for a sustained period. Unfortunately, though, his father's first wife passed away, leaving them with a son, Edward, and he married his new wife, Ethelfrith. Who was a bit of a canny woman from the age, and she was Ethelred's mother. When Edgar died, she had, or rumour has it, that she had Edward the heir killed so that Ethelred could become king. So there was all kinds of divisions there about the succession. But also during his reign, Edgar had created a bit of division in the country around kind of monastic church and ecclesiastical churches. And he had the famous monk Dunstan in his ear. So he took a lot of land off the church, gave it to the monastical organization. So there was, even though we kind of had a peace already, his father had laid the seeds for kind of what was to come. And you also had kind of the Danelaw up in the north, which was still causing problems. So in fairness to Ethelred, to kind of give a bit of a balanced view, when he came to power amidst a lot of problems. Had he been perhaps a bit stronger, a bit more warlike, a bit more fierce, he might have fared a little bit better. But he did rule for a long time. Like, so inept is probably a difficult one. He was probably more easily led than he was inept. And he was not a warrior kind of king. And he had obviously a lot of strong personalities around him that gave him bad advice, hence his epithet. He did make a lot of bad decisions, especially when it came to the Vikings. He paid them a lot of money. He paid the Danegeld, which was essentially huge amounts of silver and gold, to stop Forkbeard and Thorkel the Tall and all those other kind of ultra violent people from attacking his people and his shores. But obviously the problem is, when you pay a Viking a lot of money to go away, what happens when the money runs out? They just come back, right, and look for more. And that was a big problem. He was also kind of, later on in his reign, he took a lot of bad advice, and there was the famous St. Brice's Day massacre, where, and we'll probably come back to the lead up to that, I imagine, as we talk. But essentially, he decided to massacre a lot of Danes who had lived in England, not just for a few years, but there were families that had lived there since the time of Alfred the Great, and that obviously caused a problem. And there was all kinds of edicts and things that he gave, which sowed a lot of division in the country. So yeah. But yeah, back to my initial, was he inept? Yeah. But there are a lot of mitigating factors. And obviously he left at the times when things got most difficult. And, Forkbeard, who's one of the most successful Vikings ever, when things got tough, he left. He fled to Normandy, and that was a problem. So I think he made a lot of bad decisions, and he was probably weak but yeah, it was an amazing time. It's a very difficult time for us to comprehend. Like, you see things now in our lifetime, and you know, the world we all live in now with the politicians and prime ministers and presidents making decisions. But it was very different then when you've got like the threat of imminent and violent death is hard for us to comprehend, and
Mm.
it's very, you're trying to put yourself in Ethelred's mind at that time, and should he have fought harder, perhaps? But a lot of the people who were powerful in his time, a lot of his ealdormen and people who he looked for advice weren't great either. So
Mm.
he was perhaps surrounded by people who were inept as he was, and people who were kind of looking towards their own success rather than his, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I guess there's a chicken and egg in there, isn't there? Because a strong leader might still have those rather selfish advisors, but he doesn't take any nonsense from them. So even the same people around Ethelred, if they were around, say, Canute, wouldn't have got the same traction and probably wouldn't have been appointed to positions of power, perhaps, because he was a better judge and a stronger man.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare him to Alfred, say Alfred the Great, like obviously he, when the Vikings came, the sons of Ragnar came in 865, and he was pushed right back into the marshes, and
Mm,
we all know that famous story. But he was able to rise up and fight them back. But that was something that Ethelred could never really do. But the world he lived in was a different place. I
yeah,
think the Ealdormen and the kind of regional factions at the time, and what had happened with the church and it was all these different factions either working with him or against him. There was a lot of betrayal.
Mm.
yeah. It
Um,
is. It's hard to compare, isn't it? Really,
yeah,
there's different because we think of England as a country, and of course it wasn't when Alfred was around, and the
no.
problems were therefore very different.
They were, and I think that's where but and that wasn't that long ago.
No.
So you have men in power in places that had once been kingdoms, and you've also got powerful families that had once been Viking settlers themselves.
Mm,
And it's not that long, in those times think that your great grandfather would have been royalty almost. So
yeah.
those divisions kind of run deep. And if you're happy and you're wealthy and your land is safe, you don't, it's fine. But when strain comes, all those old feelings started to come back, and like that, I don't think he was at the Red was an impressive figure. And yeah, look, that's why it makes it such a great time to write a story,
Mm.
and there's so many kind of things going on. And
Do you think he was a bit of a mummy's boy? Because his mum seems to have held the reins a little tighter. She started as his regent, didn't she? But then
yeah,
his first wife couldn't be crowned because his mum had been crowned. So it was only after she died that his second wife got crowned. And it's like she sounds like she held a little too tightly.
yeah, I think so. And that's in the series there, my kind of my warlord series there, setting that I paint her very much in that light, that she's controlling, she's strong, she's political. She did what she did. Like nobody knows for sure if she had Edward the heir killed,
Mm,
but it seems pretty clear to me that she did. So she was obviously very strong, very influential. So yeah, definitely he was a mummy's boy, and she probably overshadowed him,
mm.
I think, in terms of her power and her strength. That probably made him weaker,
Mm,
you know?
Yeah, which it's great that she's a strong woman.
yeah.
It's just, but you see it later, don't you, with Edward the First being a strong king, his son Edward the Second not so strong. So it
Yeah.
just seems to be a pattern that you get a strong leader followed by one who's,
Well, they say that even now, don't they? There's that saying, isn't there, that soft times breed weak
yeah,
men and hard times breed strong men, that
Mm,
kind of thing. I think that was probably the case with Ethelred, is that he grew up, under his mother's shadow, like that. His father was famously ruled over a country at peace. And I think a lot of he was probably raised around a lot of religion, and he was probably hidden away because his mother ruled in his stead. He was probably hidden away and kept away from
mm.
learning what he should have learned, which was, unfortunately for him, how to fight
mm,
and how to keep his ealdormen in check. And he wasn't able for that.
So the beginning of the 11th century, what were the threats that that England faced then? Was it just the Danes or?
No, well, the Danes is obviously a massive threat because for the first time you have this kind of hugely powerful, the opposite of Ethelred almost in Spain, Fortbeard, who had risen up. His father's Harold Bluetooth, who himself is a massively famous. Like, and even if you imagine what it takes to be famous amongst the Vikings, the Danes, the Swedes, the Norsemen, like to become a man of reputation amongst them tells you something about those fellas in itself. So Forkbeard, when he's young, just completely rebels against his father, Harold Bluetooth, builds his own reputation, his own armies, becomes king in Denmark, fights this huge battle, the Battle of Svolder, against Olaf Tryggvason, who himself is a massively famous Viking who'd been to England and raided and blah blah. Forkbeard defeats all them, so for the first time he's kind of king in Denmark. He rules over parts of Norway and he brings his armies to England. So he has this kind of cohort of Viking jarls or warlords and their ships and their warriors, and what they want is battle and silver and success and all those things that people who've got. Like if you think like it's not a jolly, they're not. It's to come across the sea with your ships is a dangerous undertaking. It costs a lot of money. Each ship, has got 100 oak trees. It takes a couple of years to weave a sail, and to keep men on board those ships fed and happy, you need a lot of silver and a lot of ambition, and a lot of power to bring them. So that's the main threat. Is Forkbeard has set his eyes on England, and he comes and he just keeps coming. He doesn't just come once. He keeps on coming, and there's men with him like Thorkel the Tall, famous brutal men who keep coming and attacking the kingdom. But you've also got the old kind of divisions in England. You still have the old Danelaw families from Alfred's time. That the Danelaw is no more really, but it obviously it doesn't. Even though it's no more because Eric Bloodaxe is gone and the Kingdom of York is gone. The families are still there. The people are still there. They still hark back to their old families and their old power. Then you've got the problems that aren't as exciting to read about, which is this whole issue of the church and the monasteries and the taking of land and how tithes are paid and all that kind of, that doesn't feature as much in the books because it's perhaps not as exciting. But in terms of the power plays that Ethelred faced, it is important. Because if I'm an alderman and I'm trying to pass land on to my family and I have to give up portions of it to the church and you have to pay tithes to monasteries or they taking tithes from you, like all these things are hugely important. And that was a legacy that his father left him, was these problems that a lot of the powerful aldermen wanted their land back that had been taken from them. And so you have all those kind of machinations going on in the background. You've got his mother. You've got the fact that the heir Edward was killed. You've got Ealdormen who fell on different sides of that, like Bertnott, who features heavily in the first book in this series, who died at the Battle of Maldon. You've got these, so you've got these, like he was not Ethelred, so Bertnott was a fighter to his unfortunate demise in that the Vikings goaded him into a fight that he should have won and he lost, but that's a different story. So there's all these kind of divisions in the country and that there are problems that he faced. Yeah, it was a complex time. It wasn't just that the Vikings had come. Ethelred already ruled over kind of a fractured kingdom with lots of political problems in it.
It would have taken a superhero like Alfred the Great to actually get a victory out of all that, maybe.
It would, yeah, and things happened at the time, like crazy things, like we were talking earlier about how inept Ethelred was, but sometimes he did try and do good things, like he built a massive fleet at one stage. I can't remember how many ships, maybe 70
Yeah.
ships, right? And the idea of the fleet was obviously to combat Forkbeard and his fleet coming south all the time, which is actually for the first time, that is a good idea because he could have used the fleet. The last thing the Vikings wanted was to fight a fair fight because obviously they're away from home. They've got if they lose their ships and they lose too many men, the campaign's over. They have to go, have to sail home, So even if you can put them off and deter them enough, you'll win. The problem is that The chap who was appointed to lead the fleet was Edric Striona's brother, who was an absolute disaster. They all ended up falling out. One of the aldermen took it, right, I'm off, took his ships away, burned a load of the others. So the lads then took that fleet to chase him instead of fighting Forkbeard and lost the whole thing. So, the idea was right, and Ethelred oversaw that, but the people that were in charge of running it for him just tore it to pieces,
So Ethelred has the right to claim the father of the English Navy.
Yeah, but yeah, albeit for a short period of time, yeah. But the idea was, and we England never had that before, a fleet of warships, and he did try and do things like he tried to bring Vikings into his employ, like Thorkel at all, Chainsides, for a long time, fought for
Yeah.
Ethelred, but a lot of these people just ended up betraying him. So, in answer to the question, like there was so many problems, a lot of them from within.
And one of them, of course, is Edric Striona,
Yeah.
because he was Ethelred's son-in-law.
So yeah, well, yeah. So nobody really knows for sure how he started out, but we think his father was a thane. He comes to Ethelred's court. He's mentioned in some early, at the time you can get a lot of information from edicts and declarations, and people are named as witnesses. So he kind of starts appearing as a witness and a named person on some of these edicts and declarations. But then he's involved in the murder of a powerful alderman, and then is eventually miraculously named as the alderman of Mercia himself, which is astonishing. That Mercia is a hugely kind of powerful, it's a massively powerful position, and either shortly before or shortly after he marries Ethelred's daughter, yeah. But Striona is you couldn't make it up, and again, like he is one of these characters. If you're writing him, you have to leave stuff out because it becomes too unbelievable. The thing that he did and the thing he's like remember Game of Thrones, the series? He's like a character out of that. But he did that many things. You have to water him down, or he becomes unbelievable.
And yet he did it because he kept changing sides, didn't he?
Kept changing sides, kept killing people, kept taking silver, kept making war on his own people as well as the Vikings. Like his name Striona means the grasper, which kind of sums him up. He kind of clawed his way to the top, to the very top. Yeah, he's kind of probably rightly so one of the most hated people, I think, in English history, and he definitely earned that reputation, I think.
So what got him there? Did Ethelred ever trust him, or was it just that because he was his son-in-law, he had to have him in his council?
Because he married his daughter. He must have trusted him at one time because he rose so spectacularly, like Thomas Cromwell-esque from nothing. Well, not from nothing, like he's the son of a thane, but even that wouldn't bring a man to be the alderman of Mercia. Like that would make him one of the top under the king. He answers to nobody, but Ethelred, once he's in that position, he has armies of his own. Men he can call up and raise men to fight on his own. He can make war. He's huge amount of silver rolling into his pockets. His influence. So Ethelred must have trusted him at some point. Like he's obviously hugely intelligent, very cunning, able to influence people, but a hugely powerful figure. Yeah, but ultimately becomes a betrayer. But flip-flops.
Yeah.
Must have been quite persuasive, mustn't he?
Oh yeah.
Must have been quite persuasive because of the fact that he managed to change sides. Okay, it got him in the end, but he did seem to be able to sway people.
But and also not just Ethelred, but also the Danes also sway Forkbeard and his son Canute to accept what he said, even though they knew he was kind of this slippery figure. But again, he had power and he had men. He had land, and that gives him influence. So once he was in, it's that astonishing rise that we'll never know how he got from the son of a thane to all of a sudden becoming the alderman of Mercia.
He must have known something. There must be a secret that he knew.
He must have known or done something, yeah. But it's It's unbelievable. And there's no, as far as my research taught me, or as far as I could find, there's no there's no understanding of how he made that jump. Like he
Mm.
literally goes from the son of a Thane to appearing on a few documents with his brother. All of a sudden, he's married to the king's daughter and he's the alderman of Mercia. It's crazy.
Mm.
He's a bit of a fixer, I think, though, isn't he? Because I think, and those sort of people tend to survive quite a long time because when the king says, well, actually, what we could do with is this, and he goes away
Yeah,
and gets it done.
yeah.
And I guess for someone like Ethelred, that was very impressive.
Mm.
Well, yeah. So I think in 1006, like he's involved in the murder of an ealdorman. He kills, or he's involved in the killing of Ealdorman Elfhelm. And the year after, he becomes the Ealdorman of Mercia. And then a little bit later, he kills other ealdormen. So he's
Mm,
no compunction in making problems go away.
yeah,
But yeah, he is very much a fixer and an influencer, and
yeah,
he's no problem spilling blood
Mm.
to get
mm,
the job done for sure. Yeah,
He's a fascinating
yeah,
character for a historical fiction writer, isn't he?
he is. He is. He is. He's
It's
kind of
right.
horrible,
Yes.
but he is a caricature, and like that, when he features heavily in the book you mentioned earlier, Sharon, Death of a Kingdom, and like I said a few minutes ago, you have to leave out things that he
Mm.
did and that he was involved in because it becomes unbelievable. Like towards the end, when he's killing his own people, slaughtering wholesale his
Mm.
own Saxon people, burning places, looting places. This kind of this real ride of terror that he goes on. It was hard for people to understand how brutal he was, but he must have also,
mm,
as for all his brutality, at court, he must have also been the kind of silver-tongued kind
Mm.
of courtier as well.
yeah, yeah. I'm sure you're right. So you mentioned Sweyn Forkbeard a couple of times. So he actually, at some point, becomes sort of King of England,
Yeah.
doesn't he? Briefly. So how does that come about?
It really is that it's sustained pressure and it's sustained raiding. So he comes and he goes and he keeps coming back. And Fort Beard is this kind of hugely powerful, like I said before, figure. And once he set his eyes on England, like he's not going to give up, and like that, he's got the whole of kind of Scandinavia behind him, and he just keeps on coming. And as much as Ethelred keeps paying him, and he's advised to pay him, the more he pays him, he just keeps coming back. And
Mm.
it's that sustained pressure,
Mm,
really. And then the tact kind of changes in that. Obviously, there's the St. Brice's Day massacre is a huge problem for Ethelred. So he decides he's going to kill all the like at one point he invites Danes in and he has this kind of bodyguard of Vikings and he gives them land and settles them. And then he decides to kill them. So there's this one night, St. Brice's Day, where they kill the Danes, and that then obviously fans the flames then for the Vikings to come back and fight with renewed effort. But instead of kind of attacking from rivers in the south, they come through the Danelaw this time, coming south, rallying kind of men to their banner. What was the Danelaw? You've got these kind of sympathetic families that are descendants of Viking settlers, and he's able to rally them
mm.
to his banner. And then obviously Ethelred feels the pressure and he flees to Normandy, and that's it. Then really that leaves the country open for Forkbeard. But obviously he only is the king for a short time.
Mm.
He's crowned and then he dies. But he makes it so through his own ambition, his own kind of never say die ability to keep bringing fresh armies south to attack England.
Feels like a kind of watershed moment when we kind of switch from raiding to be paid off to raiding to make an invasion and maybe take control. And he does, as you say, does take control, not for very long, but it's an interesting one. Had he not died, how would things have worked out? Because he was pretty much in control of England when he died, I think, wasn't he?
He was, yeah, he was. He was crowned, and his rule was accepted. But when he died, it fell apart.
Yeah.
Like his son Connaught is very young. You would think that he would just succeed his father, but he doesn't. Ethelred comes back, obviously, and is king once more. So you can just see the kind of strength that Forkbeard had in that it really was all tied to his personality, his uh his force, really, his force of will to do it. So
Mm.
yeah, after Fort Beard dies, it kind of falls apart a little bit, you know.
Mm.
Yeah, because the Danes in England choose Canute, but the Witan actually invites Ethelred back. But to rule, what's the phrase? Not to rule as before or
Better than he
something.
Yeah,
did before.
exactly that. Yeah,
Yeah.
be better, come back, but be better, please.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like,
yeah,
he's been ruling for what, 30 years by this point, and he's
yeah.
never managed to be any better. But the
No,
Witan are hopeful that he can come back and rule better than he did before.
yeah.
It's like wishful thinking, surely.
I know, and he does come back, but and Knut is young, and he's kind of, he's got problems back home because Fort Beard is dead, and you can imagine when a Viking king dies, all the men who were sworn to him, all the powerful jarls and everything from back in Scandinavia, start getting itchy feet, and Knut has to go home and
Mm,
settle all that, but he does, which is almost the opposite of where Ethelred is. Connaught is able to assert his power
Mm.
over what you can only imagine are very difficult men to sway.
Yes.
mm,
To
Yeah.
fight when you're young, you have to
yeah.
prove yourself, and he
Especially
does.
his older brother was King of Denmark, wasn't he?
Yeah,
So he had a rival who
yeah,
could have claimed Norway.
yeah. But that's what I mean. If you think from a young man taking power from a hugely famous and influential father,
Mm,
Viking father,
yeah.
warrior, sailor, winner of massive battles, Connaught eventually becomes more
Mm,
successful. He actually becomes king of Denmark and Norway and
yeah.
England.
And
Mm.
yeah.
For the first time, you kind of have that almost empire ruled by one man, and
Mm,
Connaught is
Mm.
able to do that. And other than Alfred, I think he's the only one, isn't he, who has the epithet of the Great after his
yes.
name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he earned it. You can only imagine when Forkbeard had died. You can only imagine the powerful men, the warriors in that army. I'm not going to follow a kid, like,
Mm.
this is my
Mm.
time, and
Yeah. I mean, he was only,
I've 1,000 men of my
yeah.
own. Do you know, like, why shouldn't I be the king?
He was only 17 or 18 or something like that, wasn't he? So he was
Yeah,
very young,
yeah.
untested, other than as his father's son. So he probably needed to get a couple of battles under his belt where he's the
Mm.
leader.
Yeah. This is what's great to kind of write about the time, is you can almost imagine a young Knut, and his advisors and war leaders are sat around him, and they're all these kind of grizzled men, with axes on their laps with notches in them, and plated beards and scars and missing ears and stuff. And he's 17,
Yeah.
barely got a beard
Yeah.
himself, trying to tell them what to do. You can just imagine the
Mm.
scene, can't you? Like,
Mm.
Yeah.
But he does it. He does get them to follow him eventually, and he comes back with renewed vigor, you might say.
Mm,
Yeah. So the other thing in passing, it always I find interesting is the fact that that Ethelred also had a young son, Edmund Ironside, who was put in that position of succeeding him and matched against this young, more or less same age, I think, Canute. So you've got a kind of story there in itself, haven't you? Really, these two young guys.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness to Ironside, yeah, he
Yeah,
does well. To be
yeah,
fair, like, a bit like what you said, Sharon, is the son of a weak father. Is actually
mm,
he does well. He fights.
mm,
He leads armies. But he falls out with his father. They have there's a rift between them. He raises men of his own, but ultimately he's betrayed
yeah,
by Striona. At the battle of
yeah.
Assendale, Striona
mm.
betrays him and change sides again, and that's it.
Well, let's talk about Striona and his rather unfortunate end. Um, did
Yeah,
he get what he deserved, do you think?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So in my book, I have it that the kind of the main character sees him off at the end because it has to be that way for the payoff. But
Yeah,
what really happened is he kind of obviously he betrays Ethelred, he betrays Edmund Ironside, goes over to the Danes, blah blah blah, and there's this kind of big feast, this big kind of Yule Christmas feast. Knut is there, and he says to one of his Vikings, Earl Eric Harkinson, "Pay this man what we owe him," and he does. and lops off his head, which is kind of which probably it would have been better for everyone if that had have happened about 20 years ago.
Mm.
But yeah, he is, and there was the whole thing with the fleet and the whole thing with him changing sides, killing Elderman. So he definitely deserved his sticky end. But for me, Striona is one of the great characters from history. Right? He's great to write. He's great to try and step inside his head. But you like I say, that it's brilliant when you find a character you have to water down for a historical action fiction novel. You know?
Yeah.
Is there part of it that could be justified as he's trying to survive?
Oh yeah, well he's come from virtually nothing, hasn't he? And clawed his way up, married a princess, become an alderman, become an earl then under the Danes. He becomes a
Mm.
powerful earl. Yeah, like he obviously is trying to survive, and that's his whole thing. Is he's out for himself. He's willing
Mm.
to kill, manipulate, betray to get what he wants, you know. And it's his actions that lay and along with Connaught and Ethelred and all these great people and Elfrith and Emma of Normandy and all these fascinating people at the time that lay the foundation for what will ultimately come in 1066, and Earl
Mm.
Godwin and all that. These are all things that happen.
Mm.
The foundations for them are all laid at that time, and Striona plays a massive part in that, yeah.
So it's Striona's fault. The Norman conquest is Striona's fault.
No, I'm joking, but it's just he is just one part of that melting pot, isn't he? He's just one
Yeah,
character that leads up to that. But it's such a great time in history with all these big personalities, and we're trying to find little kernels of it in the sources to
yeah.
Mm.
piece together what actually happened, and we then as writers can try and dream up and make them into real people, which is great.
Mm.
But Striona must have thought by Christmas 1017, he was probably thinking that he was on the crest of a wave again. That he was thinking, "Oh, I've done really well here. I betrayed him, but I've fallen on my feet.
Yeah,
I'm at the court of King Canute.
yeah.
Everything's going absolutely well."
Yeah, he's great. Canucks
Swimmingly.
his mate. Everybody's his friend. He's
Yeah,
powerful. He's wearing big chains, and
yeah,
he's living the dream until he's not.
yeah. But it just shows a lot. It tells us almost more about Canute than it does Striona, doesn't
Yeah,
it? That he decided, well, this guy, I can't keep him around because he's just going to
Yeah.
be so untrustworthy.
which kind of goes back to where we started, doesn't it? About if Ethelred was inept, like Canute wasn't. And obviously he used
Yeah,
Striona for his own purposes, and then ultimately gave him what he deserved without hesitation, without
yeah,
in a massively violent way, because that's what he was, and that's
yeah,
what Ethelred should have been. It was that time. It was a time of,
mm,
it was a time of, church and prayer and peace. But if you're going to survive, unfortunately, you had to be violent beyond anything we can comprehend, and ruthless.
mm,
And Canute was,
Mm.
able to bend powerful Viking warriors to his will, to take over the country, to become a king, to marry the widow of a former king, and not see any problem with
mm,
that. And she accepted him, and
mm,
do you know what I mean? So Canute was a massively powerful
yeah.
and strong person, and isn't it great that he gave Striona these just desserts, fair play to him. Justice.
Wonder if he let him eat dessert first and then gave him his just
Yeah.
dessert.
Maybe he did. Maybe he had a bit of pigeon pie and then lost his head or something. Who knows?
Like if there's one person in the 11th century who deserved that end, it was
It
Dietrich
was.
Striona.
And thank God he got it. That makes the story even better, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Like he didn't get away with
Yeah,
it, kind of thing. He got his comeuppance.
yeah,
I
justice.
suspect he was mourned by very, very
I'd
few
say so.
people.
But it's another great scene to imagine, isn't it? Like the fire blazing
Yeah,
and Connaught is sat there, and he kind of Shriona's very kind of satisfied with himself, and then all of a
it's
sudden,
chilling.
yeah, you can, like, you can just imagine, out of all the men Connaught could have called upon, you can just imagine that Eric Harkinson is probably, a fierce kind of bloke in our, chainmail and fur, and he's the one who's picked out to give Striona his comeuppance. It's a great, all these things
Mm.
are,
Kind of like a gangster send-off,
yeah.
isn't it, really? I mean, it's kind of, invited in and, made to feel welcome and then shot in the head.
Yeah, and you can just imagine Shriona kind of, he hears those words and he looks around and there's this big kind of hairy Viking bearing down on him. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, possibly expecting to see a chest of gold.
Yeah. And instead there's just an axe coming after him.
So I think I know what your answer is going to be, but who was the most influential man of the early 11th century?
It's a difficult one, right? I always lean towards Forkbeard because without him there could be no Canute, but you kind of have to say
Mm.
Canute because he ultimately became the king of three countries, and he raised up Earl Godwin, and Godwin is ultimately the kingmaker, and all that kind of setting the scene for 1066. So I'm happy to debate whether it's Forkbeard or Connaught, and you could probably come down on either side. But in fairness, on any given day, I kind of flip flop between the two because without the father, you couldn't have the son.
Mm.
But Connaught is a great man, like that. He could have easily been swallowed up
Yeah.
Yeah.
when he was a kid and his dad died. He could have easily
Mm.
withered in that storm, but he didn't. He flourished.
Well, that's the thing. He could have easily turned around and said, "Well, they don't want me. I'll go and find something else to
Yeah.
do." But a lot of 17, 18-year-olds get that rejection, and that's it.
Oh,
It
yeah.
colours the rest of their
But
life.
there must have been a dozen brutal Danes and Norsemen who were ready to take his head and vie to become a king themselves, and that didn't happen. And like that, he was able to rule over three kingdoms. So he was a great man.
What you said about without the father, you haven't got the son. And Forkbeard kind of changed the dynamic by becoming king of England rather than just raiding. So I guess, would Canute have done that off his own bat? Or was he shown that that actually was possible by Sweyn Forkbeard? So there is an argument both ways, isn't there, really?
Yeah, and their whole way of thinking, that generation of Vikings, their way of thinking changed
Mm,
because you've got that dynasty there. You've got Bluetooth, Forkbeard, and then and Canute, all three of them really were savage men, hugely intelligent, hugely warlike and powerful. But
mm,
the first kind of wave of Vikings, the Ragnarsons, Ivar and Ubba and Sigurd
yeah,
and these chaps, they when they came, they were very much raiders and they didn't want to be, even though Ivar was king in Dublin already, but they were really about extortion and putting puppet kings in
yeah,
place. That changes with and I think maybe for Forkbeard he saw what was possible, the Battle of Svolder and Tryggvason and all that, and those dynasties and killing kings and princes, making himself king. It changes his view on what might be possible. And for a man of
yeah,
kind of not afraid to have ambition and seize it, like the ultimate goal is to be a king, right?
mm,
And
yeah,
if you're brave enough and able enough to build an army and bind all these strong men to you, becoming a king is the ultimate kind of success, isn't it? And
yeah,
as
Mm.
well, something I didn't get into in the books and stuff is that complexity of being the divine rule of being, it's God given that you're the king, you're God's voice on earth. There's a little bit of complexity around that with Forkbeard and Connaught and how that kind of influences their thinking. We can't fully understand that now, but there is a
Mm.
little bit of a complexity around that.
mm,
Because Forkbeard and Canute were both Christians, weren't
Yeah.
they? So, because
mm,
we always have this idea of the Vikings being the pagans and the
mm,
English being the Christians, but this time it's Christian against Christian,
Yeah.
so you haven't got the paganism.
Yeah, and what their understanding of was that relationship of kingship and God and
Mm.
rule is it's not something we can understand now. It's a different concept.
mm,
It's that whole what way did that sit in their minds in terms of striving to be a king,
Yeah.
divine right
yeah,
to rule, and it's complicated,
mm,
but still
mm,
interesting.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Amazing period. Absolutely amazing.
It is like if you're an old, obviously they didn't think, but if you're an old school Viking, like you think along different lines.
Yeah.
You're thinking of Odin, and it's great if your ultimate goal is to die in battle. Like that's it, living the dream.
Mm.
When that axe is coming for your neck, it's like, right, boys, I'm off. See you up there, and we'll drink
Yeah.
some curved horns, and there'll be wenches, and we'll fight all day, and
Just make sure I've got an
whoever's
axe.
the champion, we'll do it again the next
Yeah.
day in a massive hall where the roof is made of shields and the walls are spears. To all of a sudden, you're a Christian,
Mm.
and you think a bit differently. Then, do you know?
Yeah.
Mm.
You kind of you think the same almost, but your goals and your orientation is different.
Mm.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of that, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what are you working on at the moment then? What are you working on now?
Working now, so the next one out to be published. I've a series about King Arthur with my
Yeah.
publisher, and the book
Yeah.
4 of that is
Yes.
out in July.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, brilliant. I've been
yeah.
waiting for
So
that.
yeah, that I love that series, but it's
Yeah.
very dark. It's kind of like the fall of Britain, and in that
Mm.
book, you've got kind of. I don't know, spoiler alert, everybody kind of knows at that stage, but you've got all the problems that he encounters with his wife and his best mate, and
Mm.
you've got a lot of strong women in that series as well. You've got Guinevere and Morgan and
Yeah.
Nimue,
Mm.
all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff, and they have massive influence in that book. So that's out in July, and I'm actually writing now a Viking book set in around in Ireland kind of the 60s and 70s. You've got these kind of long ports,
Yeah.
which is what early Dublin was, and Waterford and Wexford and these places.
Mm.
And it's about those long ports, but also about the counties and the kings in Ireland and stuff like that. So I'm writing a book about that at the moment.
Yeah. That'll
Yeah.
be interesting to read.
It's just a different part of history in the way that the
Mm.
Arthurian stuff I love, because back in that Arthurian time, I like to envisage that as kind of you're left in an apocalypse after the Romans have gone, and
Mm.
it's literally like our world, but without power and law and no police, no anything. So it's that kind of that world of desolation and power struggles and.
So do we ever find out who Arthur's dad is?
Well, well, I won't tell you. You have to read the book, but I think in that I leave it kind of it's all part of the
Mm.
strain with his relationship with Merlin and.
It's
But
so
what?
annoying.
Yeah, I know.
It works well because it does annoy me that I don't know, and there's these little bits, and it's like
I know, but I do it on purpose because sometimes when things
Yeah.
annoy you, it keeps you reading. And I always think it would be a cliche. What I'm trying to achieve in that
Mm.
series well is realism. So you have Merlin, but he obviously can't do
Yeah.
real magic, but he's a druid. So he can do things and influence people, and he's access to kind of Roman texts. So he knows then there's going to be an
Mm.
eclipse, and he knows how to build a stone thrower, that things that other people
Yeah.
wouldn't have known, which seem like magic. But the whole thing about the succession is this what's the word? It's this kind of darkness in
Mm.
Merlin where he's trying to
Going wrong.
influence things, and
Mm.
it ends up going against him. Yeah, he's trying to find redemption, but he can't find it because he just keeps manipulating people. It's a bit of a dark book, unfortunately, for Arthur, because on the cusp of victory and defeating the Saxons and Britain, the British kind of restoring themselves to
Mm.
Britain. Obviously, his world collapses, and yeah, dark
So
times.
you've gone basically with the legend, with the sort of Mallory kind of story, but you've set it at what would be, in theory, the Arthurian time.
Yeah, so it's kind of set like the Romans have gone 2 generations ago.
Yeah.
So what you're left with then is these kind of and they still use Roman terms like comitatus and warlords and stuff. You're left with these, the lads who were the strongest really controlled resources. So you've got hill forts and you've got strong men, and they can only afford to keep so many professional warriors because you have to feed
Mm.
them, pay them, house their families. You've got a lot of raiding, kind of petty kingdoms, and then you kind of have kings then in all these kind of old Roman towns and cities that are falling apart.
Yeah.
It's that kind of time.
Yeah, it's kind of running in parallel with my series, The Last of the Romans, which tries to be as historical as possible, but as you well know, it's damn near impossible in that time period because you're always guessing.
Yeah, and
Well, we've got lots of archaeology now, but you're still
you're
guessing.
still guessing. So what I did is I took kind of the oldest. I took Nennius, the 12 battles of Arthur.
Yeah,
That is the series essentially. So he has
yeah,
these 12 battles, and I stick to that.
yeah,
But then I also weave in the kind of medieval romance characters that everybody knows and
yeah,
loves into that
yeah,
narrative.
yeah,
You know, so you have
yeah,
Morgan and Merlin and
yeah,
like the only person we know about from that, the people we know about from that time, you've got Hengist and Horsa, who are the kind of Saxons.
yeah.
You've got Vortig.
Fictional though, aren't they,
You've got these
really?
names.
I don't believe
Yeah.
in them.
No, like
I mean, you've just got almost nothing really in terms of names.
nothing. And a lot of the documents are political documents written years later
Yeah,
for different
yeah,
reasons. But
yeah.
I think there has to be some kernel in them of something
Yes.
that
Yeah,
happened at that time. Like there was, you know, whether it's Ambrosius or Arthur or whoever it is,
yeah.
you've got a Briton who fought against the Saxons. The Saxons came,
Well,
you know.
I've gone with Ambrosius
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Gildas
yeah,
mentions him. But I mean, you could throw a stone in a pond and find somebody.
yeah. So the way I have it is that Merlin's first champion is Ambrosius,
Yeah,
so he's the first Arthur,
yeah,
but he fails because Merlin's interfering. That falls apart, and Ambrosius has Excalibur, but he dies, and Arthur is kind of the next Ambrosius, you know. But yeah, you're taking these little journals
yeah.
and
It's interesting period.
Yeah, and they're both Derek's and Peter's books. They're incredibly well written, and you each use the same legend, but in going
yeah,
different directions, and it's like I have to remember to read. I've got all these stories of King Arthur in my head now, as
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
Angus Donald's as well,
yeah,
and they're all different versions, but they're all fascinating.
yeah. It's picking these like that like Ethelred and like that. It's picking these. That's what's great about
yeah,
being a writer, isn't it? You can pick
yeah,
these times out of history
Mm,
and interpret it and make it your own, and you're trying to build these characters. Like and when you go as far back as we are with Arthur and Ambrosius and Gildas and all those times, like you're really just
yeah,
taking fragments and
yeah,
mm,
interpreting it. And what I wanted to do was take the bits of what we know plus the kind
yeah,
of the
yeah,
romance stuff
yeah.
and just weave it into a
yeah.
Mm.
realistic story, you know.
And I like the way you both put powerful women in there rather than just using them as girlfriends of the leading characters. You know, they
Yeah,
have
yeah,
influence of their own.
But they were
Yeah.
there. We just don't.
yeah,
We just don't know. We just don't know what they did. But they were
Mm,
there, weren't they? And it's like that time, like the medieval times. You don't hear much about them, but you can only imagine what Elfric
yeah.
was like,
yeah,
or Emma of Normandy. You can
yeah,
only imagine the influence that these women and the strength.
yeah.
Because one, to stay alive. Two, to stay in
Mm,
power.
Mm,
You know, you're trying to get your son on the throne. You're willing to shed blood to do it.
mm.
Like you must be able to influence men and
yes.
you know warriors and make them do your bidding, you know, like the women were
Yep.
there. We just don't know much
Yeah,
about them because a lot of the
yeah,
history was written by men, right?
Mm,
yeah,
wasn't it
yeah.
just?
Well, virtually all of it in that period.
Yeah. Except for the one written by Emma.
I always come back
Yeah,
to a review of the second book in my series where this guy said, "Well, I would have liked more detail about the events of the time." And I replied, "Well, so would I."
So would I,
There's just nothing.
yeah,
There
no,
are no events
no,
really, or
Mm,
almost none.
no, but again, that's what kind of makes it interesting is it gives you kind of carte
Yeah,
blanche then to interpret it the way you want for what
yeah.
you hope your readers will enjoy, you know?
yeah.
And I think it's good for readers as well because they get different interpretations of the same
Yeah.
period,
Yeah.
basically, which is more
Yeah.
interesting for readers.
Yeah, and I love the kind of the idea that there's still that the last embers of the kind of Romans there. Like I have
Yeah.
a particular area that still wear the kind of lorica segmentata and still,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Still have that kind of bit of Rome hanging on.
Yeah, and it's like that with the Tudors. You know what's going to happen. Whatever book you read, novel about the Tudors, you know what's going to happen. With
Yeah.
the Romans, with King Arthur, because there's so little information, there's no specific story you have to keep
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
So you can read 3 or 4 different authors' versions. Bernard Cornwell isn't the definitive. You can then read Peter Gibbons, you can then read Derek Birks, Angus Donald, and the rest, and you still get a story, and you still don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's great. And I think most people, when you read back over your reviews, most people just want to read something about people like that time, and they like King Arthur, and they just want to read about it.
Yeah,
that's great.
It's one of my go-to periods. If there's a new King Arthur book out, then if there's a new author doing a King Arthur, I'm going to give them a go, because I just love the Arthurian legends. And most of them, they take you in different directions. So it's brilliant.
Yeah.
That's great. And we all love review. I think one of the books in the Saxon series, I think the day it went live, so, the first review you get on Amazon stays there for ages. It was 1 star. Haven't read it yet.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
And there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, it's so infuriating.
Like you've been off on a blog
dear.
tour and there's all these people reading it and you're waiting for reviews to go, 1 star, haven't read it yet. Thanks for that.
Please go back and change it when you have.
You've no right of recourse or anything. There's literally nothing you can do. Like,
no, just got to take it, haven't you?
It just sits there. You just have to go on all the socials and say, please, people, review the book.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter Gibbons, for joining us today. It has been a pleasure, as always, chatting with you. I do recommend Death of a Kingdom. It's a fascinating read and interesting to see the dastardly Edric Striona get his comeuppance.
Yeah, I guess that was a big spoiler alert, really. But
yeah, well, I think most people who are interested in the time would know, right? What happens to good old Edric. But I really appreciate you having me on, guys. It was a great conversation. Thanks a million.
Yeah, good to talk.
It was an absolute pleasure, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Cheers now.
Thanks.
So do join us next time when Derek and I will be taking a deep dive into the Stanley brothers, heroes or villains. Thanks very much for listening. I'm Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. Thanks for listening. And remember that you can subscribe to our podcast either with your regular podcast provider or on YouTube. They're all on YouTube. And we'd also love to hear from you. Any feedback you've got is very much appreciated. We'll try to reply to you. Thanks again.